On May 4th, 2020, Disney Plus released the final episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars. It was titled Victory or Death, and it capped off about one of the most beloved collected entries inside of the entirety of the Star Wars mythos. Not just initially in the legends, as it was intended to be, but also inside of the canon, as it ultimately became part of. Star Wars The Clone Wars was launched in 2008 as a not well-received movie, but through about 5 years worth of solid work, determination, innovation, and creativity, Dave Filoni and team managed to craft a series that won Emmys to tell mature, intelligent stories in an adventurous, entertaining fashion that could be shown to children. It was beloved, and eventually it ended in 2012, to be preceded by what was essentially the first draft of what Clone Wars was initially supposed to be in Star Wars Rebels, which eventually would polish up to a surprisingly solid storyline and entertaining show. However, facing a lot of criticism for some very poor decision-making and quality control decisions, Lucasfilm and Disney decided to greenlight Filoni and team to finish up 3 arcs from what was supposed to be the last 2 seasons of their show for one final epic season. The first 2 arcs are fairly solid, entertaining, adventurous, but we're not going to talk about those here on Unexpected Awesome. No, we're going to talk about the final arc. The Siege of Mandalore arc opens up with Ahsoka Tano being asked to reclaim Mandalore from the grips of Darth Maul's Shadow Syndicate. She goes there with her former master Anakin Skywalker's army, the 501st, accompanied by his second-in-command, Captain Rex, a close friend of hers, and a seasoned veteran of the Clone Wars. They root out Maul, and eventually she faces him inside of the throne room inside of the capital city, where he tries to convince her to join his quest against his former master, Darth Sidious, the engineer of the Clone Wars, and the person bringing about the end of the Jedi, as well as potentially Maul. She refuses, refusing to take his hand and refusing to believe that her master could turn against the Jedi and the Republic itself, which she's seen him fight for on many occasions. So they fight, with the last of the Shadow Syndicate super commandos facing off against the splinter forces of the Death Watch and the Grand Army of the Republic, with the Maul eventually being defeated by their combined power and Ahsoka wearing him down in an epic duel that starts out in the throne room and ends at the ceiling of the city. The Mandalorians restrain Maul in special bonds to keep him from using his powers and hand him off to the Grand Army of the Republic so that way they can escort him back to Coruscant. And they start the long voyage back to the capital city. Along the way, having succeeded in fully conquering the galaxy with the Grand Army of the Republic and setting all the chess pieces in place to remove his only true rivals to power, the Jedi Order, Sidious issues a blanket command to the clones of the Grand Army of the Republic to execute Order 66 and mop up anybody left of the Jedi Order that hasn't been killed in combat over the last 3 years of galaxy-wide war. Ahsoka's longtime friend desperately struggles not to shoot her, but the biological chip implanted in his skull since birth pushes him to try to execute her. He tries to tell her, in whatever words that he can get past the chip, to look up a file on another clone, Fives, who several months earlier found out about the conspiracy to turn the clones against the Jedi. Ahsoka uses her powers to fight off the clones and escape, eventually having to hide in the hallways to keep from being hunted and executed by them. She frees Maul so that way he can cause a series of diversions and distractions, so that way she can search the ship's database for the file that Rex mentioned to her before he fully turned and attacked her. Enlisting the help of a friendly droid on the ship, she eventually gets access to the file in the ship's database and begins to piece together just how Order 66 was issued out to the clone army. Eventually, with help from the droid, she manages to kung fu and subdue Rex, taking him to a medical bay where the droid arranges for surgical equipment to remove the chip from Rex's head so that way she can reason with him and potentially enlist his help in escaping. However, they're discovered, and the other clones are cutting through the door with welding torches. Eventually, Rex comes to and decides that he's gonna help Ahsoka escape. So they fight their way through the hallways to the hangar bay, Rex firing off stun shots on his fellow brothers and Ahsoka using her sabers as a sword and a shield to deflect gunfire and her force powers to knock the clones out of the way, desperately trying to subdue them without hurting or killing them. While this is happening, Maul is wreaking havoc upon the ship, fighting off waves of clones as they attack him. In a scene that I can only really describe as the opening to John Wick 3, but with space magic, Maul fights off whole squads of clone troopers desperately trying to cap him. Completely unarmed and without a lightsaber, he uses his powers with the dark side of the Force to tear chunks of this naval cruiser's hallways in some of the most brutal action that I've ever seen across the Star Wars IP. He eventually uses a doorway to cut the arm off of a clone to get his comm, so that way he can tap into the clone's communications and figure out not only what the clones are doing, but also where to find Ahsoka and how to escape. Maul makes his way to the hyperdrive reactor room, where in an even more impressive display of the dark side of the Force, manages to tear apart, destroy, and eventually explode the reactor cores with his mind, causing the ship to drop out of hyperspace critically damaged and drifting towards the gravitational pull of a moon. It's now a race against time to escape the ship before it plummets to the planet's surface and crashes, killing everybody on board. Ahsoka and Rex go to the control room, and in a scene that I can barely bring justice to, Rex and Ahsoka desperately try to strategize on how to escape. The droid opens up the hangar bay doors and shows them where the shuttle is. However, a small army of clones gathers inside of the hangar bay, lying in predatory wait, guns cocked and at the ready. Rex suggests fighting their way out, but Ahsoka, having a long history and respect for the clones, doesn't want to. She says that she doesn't want to hurt them. Rex then pleads with her, saying that there's no way of getting through there without hurting them. That those people that he's fought with, that he's fought to protect, that he's killed for, people that have died to protect him, they're going to kill them, and they're going to die trying to kill them, and that there's no stopping them. Ahsoka says that she doesn't care that they're willing to die. She's not going to hurt them, because they're all good soldiers, just pawns in this horrific game of deceit. She then says to Rex that she has an idea, and that she'll need his help in order to escape and potentially not harm any more of his brothers. They go into the hangar bay, Rex acting like the chip wasn't removed and pretending to have captured Ahsoka, asking her execution to be stayed on the technicality that she's no longer a member of the Jedi Order, that Order 66 does not apply to her. The other commander, Jesse, says to him that it doesn't matter. She's part of Order 66 by her past association, and by protecting her, he's committing treason and is also subject to it. Unable to reason with these clones so thoroughly turned by their own engineering, they signal the droid whose help they enlisted to start causing havoc inside of the hangar bay, lowering the platforms that the clones are standing on into the maintenance bays so that way they can break up the army and more feasibly manage them. A fight breaks out and they're desperately trying to hold the cloned tide back. In the ensuing mayhem of stun shots and bolt deflections, Maul finds his way in and sprints toward the only remaining shuttle. Ahsoka sees him and leaps forward trying to stop him, and Maul uses his considerable powers to push her back, steal the shuttle and escape. Ahsoka is almost knocked into the maintenance bays where the clones are coming to, and the clones eventually surmise the droid that is helping them, flank it, and then execute it, preventing its aid from being of any further use. And as such, the clones start raising the platforms back up again to surround, flank, and defeat our heroes. And one of the most impressive uses of the Force that I've ever seen, Ahsoka uses her blades to cut through the floor, to drop her and Rex into the hangar bay, and they then sprint forth trying to fight off the army, flooding in to defeat them. Stun shots, force powers, bolt deflections. They eventually find a functioning Y-wing, hijack it, and escape. After they escape, Ahsoka and Rex make their way down to the planet. They discover the smoking wreckage of the once proud ship of a once proud nation, and they discover, even more tragically, what's left of their once proud brothers. They then take the time to bury them in a somber scene that'll rip your heart out of your chest and then proceed to curb stomp it. Ahsoka then decides to leave behind one of her lightsabers, leaving her past as a Jedi behind her and trying to distance herself from the knowledge that Anakin is now her worst enemy, much to Maul's prediction. The episode ends, cutting several years in the future during the reign of the Empire. Stormtroopers are scouring the wreckage, investigating it for clues, and Darth Vader is there, discovering the lightsaber, realizing what it may or may not mean, emboldening him to search the galaxy for his lost student. The Siege of Mandalore arc is a gemstone on many levels, but let's start off with the most obvious level first. Let's start with the technical level. To say that the animation and production values have improved since the 2008 film is the definition of an understatement. What was once stiff, poorly modeled, obvious CGI that had the visual appearance of light-beaming clay has been replaced with a Thunderbirds-inspired case in itself to prove that CGI animation is a legitimate art form. The texture work between different materials and even particle effects puts everything in the first 2 seasons to absolute shame. Things like fabric, metal, skin, even the vitreous of eyes, all looks and feels and sounds distinct. The sound mixing has also heavily improved. To say that the sound mixing is immersive is a complete understatement, and Matthew Wood definitely deserves that paycheck he's been getting, where not only you believe what's happening, but you feel what's happening. The creak of metal, the sizzle of blaster bolts as they burn into the floor, or the crunch of bone as a doorway lops an arm off. But one of the most outstanding technical elements of the episode that really caught my attention was actually the music. The music across the Clone Wars has never been particularly special in the grand scheme of Star Wars. There are a handful of extremely noteworthy leitmotifs and songs across the series, especially in the later seasons, where Kevin Kiner proved his salt and worth. But these last 4 episodes, they've proven that he's been polishing up greatly since 2008 when he was first brought on. Many songs, from the song that accompanies the final siege battle of Mandalore, all the way to the whole suite of music that practically defines the desperate struggle between Maul, the clones, and Ahsoka and Rex to get that shuttle and escape from the crashing husk of the Venator cruiser, is pure musical perfection. Dee Baker, Ashley Eckstein, and Sam Witwer personify the characters that they play with their line delivery of the dialogue alone. Ahsoka comes across as competent, intelligent, experienced, but also caring and patient and self-doubting. Rex comes across as straightforward, to the point, and efficient, but he also comes across as inquisitive and open-minded. And Maul has some of the best scenes and voice acting across the IP. Sam Witwer personifies Darth Maul and is incredibly enrapturing. And his delivery of the excellent dialogue given to Darth Maul defines the reason that Maul persists as a fan favorite. But the best voice acting easily goes to D. Bradley Baker. His voice acting doesn't just personify the bottle-bred Juan Rico that is Captain Rex, but he also personifies the entirety of the Clone Army, portraying multiple kinds of personalities and characters, from the tragic Jesse all the way to the stock and barrel clones of the 332nd. His voice work is the definition of a case that voice acting can be as dramatic and demanding and is proud of an achievement as live-action acting. But to say the technical elements of the Clone Wars have been impressive has been basically a mainstay of the series since 2010. No, the truly more impressive element of these episodes is the writing. This episode arc not only logically and intelligently sets up the Great Purge of Mandalorians, which sets up the Mandalorian television series, but it also goes a great way in showing tonally how the Old Republic, the once noble government that led the galaxy to peace and freedom, has now turned into the Galactic Empire, a military occupation force not only betraying its greatest defenders, but also in invading and occupying countries that at the beginning of the series wanted nothing to do with the war on principle. The second half of the arc, the actual issuing of Order 66 and Ahsoka and Rex's plan to escape from it, it's a straightforward, succinct story, but all of this is tinged with a sort of cruel machine-like tragedy that couldn't more perfectly define Emperor Palpatine's attitudes towards the pawns in his chess game. It's the quiet tragedy of the fact that these men were once loving and caring brothers to these 2 characters, and now they're being forced by machine-like programming to execute them. It's the transformation of them that shows the lack of difference between the Old Republic and the Separatist Alliance, and it's the subtle journey that Ahsoka, Rex, and even Maul went through across the entire series, whether it be enlisting the help of pirate armies or taking over the underworld through grand schemes of deception, meeting and talking about the state of the war with deserters, or even just Ahsoka Tano, who incidentally was also hunted by the Clone Army before, seeing the effects of the Jedi's arrogance and negligence in the eyes of the people that even live in the capital city of the Republic. It's informed their decisions, made them careful, intelligent, shrewd, making surgical, necessary decisions, but also adding another layer of they're not trying to defeat the clones. they're trying to escape them without hurting them, and the decisions that they have to make dangerous and ultimately force their hands to make even more intense decisions. They're locked inside of a steel box with a competent army that they know because they've seen and helped sharpen it into a well-tooled weapon of war. It's incredibly tense, and the ending of the episode is probably the definition of a perfect send-off for the prequel era as well as the Clone Wars. The script and story of The Siege of Mandalore ultimately feels like Dave Filoni's love letter to the fans that have supported him from the initial relative failure of the Clone Wars film all the way to the woefully early cancellation of the original run under Cartoon Network in 2012 when Disney purchased out the Star Wars IP. Ultimately, Star Wars The Clone Wars ended not just with the bang of an exploding naval cruiser, but it ended in a way that felt patient, legitimate, and real. It felt respectful to the fans that stayed with it not only since 2008, but stayed with it since 2012. It understood that the fans cared about it, and that Filoni is as much in love with the universe and wants to see it done well as the audience does. Perhaps the true peak of his achievements inside of the IP is yet to come. This is Pontius Porcius signing off.